Well, who's ready for the continuing story time? We'll continue on reading the rest of the Spellblaze Chronicles, and then we'll go off to Lost Hope where there's a little bit more lore to read as well. From the Memoirs of Aaron Gaywell, leader of the Grand Council of Elvia. Chapter 5, The Day of the Spellblaze. I loosened Mooncutter in its sheath as the troops marched forward. My grip tightened on the reins, holding my horse in check lest it gallop ahead in excitement, and I could see my squire to my left doing the same. The tension in the air was palpable. Before us, less than a mile away, the vanguard of the Orcish armies was now visible. We had stirred up their nest, and they had respawned in full force. They were like a shadowy blight that swallowed up the horizon, a great pestilence that threatened to consume the world. Before me, the armies of the Shalorn seemed small in comparison, but I knew our strength was not told by mere numbers. Trumpets blared from the bulwarks of the front, as they ready to engage with the first wave they needed when needed. To the north were archers to crumble the initial resistance, and at their flank a legion of spell riders, their hands glowing with arcane energies as they sat atop their fearsome steeds. On the south was regular cavalry, the great swords, the armored knights, and the main bulk of our mages, readying support spells. Here and there the senior battle mages were dotted about, ready to move swiftly to the points of intense activity, and blast it away. There was no need to have more than one of them in any place, alone they could decimate a score of orcs with ease. Drums beat loudly in the distance, and a clamor arose from the enemy. They had with them trained beasts and trolls, and were arrayed in swords and maces and crude armor. One took up a loud howl, and the others joined in, and the air seemed to reverberate with their ugly voices. The cacophony was unsettling, but my army responded with a display of power. Swords and spear tips rose in the air, and crackles of lightning shot up to the heavens, the sparks shotting off the gleaming blades in the armor. The Orcish army gasped in dismay. The eastern skyline was beginning to glow red, and we knew the dawn would break any moment now, the signal for the start of the great Spellblaze. "The day is here!" one of the warriors shouted out, and it was taken up elsewhere by marching troops. "The day is here!" they began to chant, anticipating the glory to come. "The day is here!" my squire sang, his voice full of youthful joy and hope. "The day is here!" we all shouted in unison, the pride of Shalorn Kingdom in our hearts as we watched the first rays of sunlight shine out from the horizon. "The day is here! The day is here! The day is here!" Silence. All at once, our voices dropped, and a terrible brewing silence swept over the battlefield. We could feel it, every one of us, so tuned our race to the flows of magic. It was like having the breath sucked from one's lungs, or the earth disappear from beneath one's feet. All our mana channels were gone, changed suddenly, arcane energies beyond all reach. Groans and murmurs began to arise as mages clutched at their heads in sudden despair. I saw my squire lurch forward in his saddle and began to vomit uncontrollably, my standard slipping from his hand. Whilst others fell to the ground in pain. I struggled to battle an overwhelming migraine, blotches appearing in front of my eyes, and with great effort of will I managed to keep control of myself and began to seek out new paths of mana. But there was something wrong, terribly wrong. Like a river run off its course, the flow of magic across the whole Yell had changed. What could have caused this? And now I had to fight years of attunement and training that had taught me to naturally rely on the known flows and courses so that I might find new paths and new sources. And as I did so, I put my powers into deviation, and what I discovered shocked me to my core. The orcs saw us in disarray and began to charge, but my attention was turned west, not east, towards Elvia and the Crystal Tower, where our leaders had been manipulating a treasure far portal. But the tower, I felt, was gone, crumpled into the earth, and from there now emitted a wave of white-hot flame. The orcs tore into our army with little resistance, their weapons tearing through the elven troops, but they were soon met with a wave of destructive energy far greater. "Shields!" I shouted as a whole sky turned redder than blood. But above the sun-deafening roar of roasting air, I was not heard. It would have helped little anyway. Defenseless as my army was without their usual sources of mana, spirits of flame streaked down on our heads, shearing through the flesh and steel in an instant and sinking into the earth. The ground shook and lava blasted up from the deep holes torn into the rock. I put an arcane shield about myself with great effort of will. I saw my squire raise a hand to do the same, but the blaze tore off his arm. He didn't even get to scream before another wave burned through the top half of his torso. Burning blood evaporated instantly and the air became full of red mist and fire. I left my horse as it neighed and stumbled and fell burning into the ash. Another wave came, and I tried to strengthen my shield, but the force of it took me off my feet and sent me flying. I was flashed through the air like a swirling leaf, unable to do anything more than struggle to maintain my protection. All about my army was being utterly decimated. Ranks and ranks of soldiers and mages burnt to a crisp or torn apart by the raw energies. The orcs were the same, and a huge rent in the ground swallowed great numbers of their troops. Blasts of lava soon thundered upward and rained down for miles around, turning into glowing rivers of death that swept across and consumed the landscape. How I managed to stay alive, I'm still not sure. I almost slipped from consciousness at several points, but by mental tenacity, I never knew I had managed to stay focused and kept my protective shield active. I became less aware of my surroundings, not knowing if the bubble of my ward was flowing through air or fire or blood, or swallowed into Maj'Eyal into some hell never before witnessed. At last, after what seemed like a torturous age, the wave of energy passed, and I found myself lying alone in an outcrop of cracked and parched earth. The air of a haze of heat about me. I struggled to my feet and looked around, seeing nothing but desolation in all directions. Steam and smoke rose from the rents of the ground, and blood limbs and ashes were strewn all over. Nothing was alive. In a daze I despaired that I was alone of the hundreds of thousands who had stood here but a short while before. Friends and comrades, mentors and students, people I had never known, and ones I was dearly close to, all gone. A sudden pain lanced my heart as I thought of Lynali. She could not be dead, surely. I gritted my teeth and summoned the energy to levitate, and as I rose I began to get my bearings around the changed landscape. Slowly I pushed northeast, passing over devastation beyond belief. I struggled to keep my grip on my sanity as a scent of burnt flesh and blood surrounded me, my vision filled with horrid landscape beyond my imagination, the utter silence more deafening than any sound I had ever heard. Eventually I came near where the Carcoal army had stood, and cast about the ruined land for some sign of life. Then faintly I detected something, some small sliver of life, and searching it I found her. Her clothes had been mostly burnt off, her hair half turned to ash, and blood was seeping freely from the burns across her body. A weak shield still hummed over her, but as I knelt down and laid a hand on her, it vanished. Quietly she gasped a breath before whispering, "Nera," and sinking into unconsciousness. She was still alive, but barely. I looked about and saw no signs of her sister, or any of the rest of her troops, other than the scorched flesh and blackened bones that marked the scorching paths swept by the blaze. I began to cast what healing spells I could on Lynali, but I could tell it was not enough, and my weakened powers could not hope to save her. I began to cry openly, thinking all I had lost this day, all that had gone so terribly wrong. Hope had turned to crisis, and the cruelty of fate was far too much for me to bear. Trailing my dying's left head in my lap, I turned my face to the sky and screamed. Torment was in my crackled voice, and I raged against all the injustice of life and the futility of war, surrounded on all sides by blood and bones and ashes. They had once been souls and lives with hopes and dreams, now all cast away like dust in the wind. And I lamented their deaths in my despair. But mine was just one voice, one torment of a single note in a great cacophony to spread across the continent. Millions of lives lost and shattered, millions of voices raised in anguish and torture and suffering, as the devastation continued over all Maj'Eyal, from the ultimate force of destruction to Spellblaze. Alright, a Maj'Eyal. From the Memoirs of Maj'Eyal, leader of the Grand Council of Elvia, Chapter 6, A Maj'Eyal. Perhaps what happened... Alright, one moment, I gotta drink something. Alright, let's try this again. Perhaps what happened will never be truly understood. What Chateau ruins survived the Spellblaze have been little touched since. The burned hands learned his lesson. But we know that FNS and its mages lost control somehow. Whatever delicacy and balance they wrought with becoming untangled, at the moment they tried to connect to the other fire poles, the imbalance was reverberated and resonated, magnified beyond control. The fire pole in the crystal tower imploded in a fraction of a second, killing all within and crushing the land about. The energies in the Chateau relics then erupted into a blaze of white light, turning the air into fire and the ground to ruin. The blaze swept eastward, rolling over our battle with an unstoppable destructive force, and then carrying on toward the foreign lands. Most of the ancient forces of the Chateau were ripped from their roots, and the lands lain cursed ever since. Meanwhile, the other fire poles all over Maj'Eyal erupted. white stone crackings and vast swaths of energy spilling forth. All of the Kornak lands to the west were turned to desert. The dwarven halls of Korhek crumpled, and the Midvale plains were risen up as mountains and Lake Nur formed in their wake. In the south, the ancient tower of DFuxa was collapsed, and the forest beside it morphed into an ever-brewing scar of lava and blackened earth. Far in the east, the northern far pole, the larger than all of Maj'Eyal, disappeared in a vast earthquake that swallowed everything for miles around, and boiling water spewed up to fill its cavernous depths. So basically, you're getting like a sort of idea of like what the land's sort of like. So here's what you basically know from like what's being told here. Basically, the Quarks, for the most part, they lived in like the west. So where like you have like sandworm tunnels and stuff like that, that's where like the Quarks used to live. The dwarven halls of Kork were crumpled. So basically, I guess like there was dwarves in the the western mountains, but they were crumpled and they were just destroyed. The Midvale plains have risen up as mountains, and the Lake of Nur formed in their wake. So basically, from what you can see right here, perhaps like the mountains are sort of like in the middle of EL. They turned into the mountains, and like the Lake of Nur formed in their wake. So there's probably like where like the old forest was. You have like the lake. That was like that used to be like it's like plains and stuff like that. But it basically turned into like a mountains on like its like right side, and there's like a a lake on its left side. In the south, the ancient tower of DFuxa was collapsed, and the forest besides it morphed into an ever-boiling scar of lava. So Dreadfell, I assume that's what the tower is all about. And then you've got like the forest, which are basically the Spellblaze, the market of Spellblaze, basically. Far in the east, the northern far pole was basically destroyed. So where like the Nagas were, basically or where the northern were, that's where like they basically existed. But I guess they were wiped out by the Spellblaze, basically because they were destroyed. All right. And most of this destruction was wrought. The incredible energies disrupted all of mana flows around Yal. Streams of energy that followed set, slowly changing courses now were flooded and droughted, warped and split. The threads of the elements were in vast disarray, and any attuned to magic suddenly found themselves far away from their accustomed power sources. Even the heavens were changed. The warning star of Vor disappeared, the constellations were tilted off their natural courses, and the seasons went harsher since. Some say the moons dimmed and the sun went whiter ever after that day. I do not know. The whole world has seemed darker to me. The numbers killed are beyond count. The initial destruction took at least 5 million lives, and the terror that followed claimed far more. For though it had been a day of tragedy and immeasurable woe, it was to be followed by a bloody age of darkness and torment. But none of this I knew as I lay weeping in the aftermath, cradling in my lap one life I cared about. In abject misery, I called on all the healing powers I could to bring her back to me, but for one moment. Her heart beat softly, and her eyes opened, but seemingly glassing far away. "Lenali," I whispered. Her dark eyes turned toward my face. I tried to mumble an apology, to say I was sorry and was able to help her, but emotions overcame my voice. Her gaze at me was empty, as if she looked right through me, before she turned her eyes away. Slowly she raised a hand to an amulet about her neck, and with a light touched the glow, and then it crackled. Her eyes closed again, but I could feel the power from the artifact pumping into her, strengthening her heartbeat and mending her flesh. She was unconscious and still badly wounded, but for now the moral threat was gone. My thoughts were mixed. Glad she was no longer at death's door, but worried she might relapse. And at the back of my mind, scared of the empty look she had given me. Could she possibly forgive my part in this? Carefully I picked up her frail body and began the journey back to Elvia. 2 days I took on foot, through blasted and ruined ground. On the passage I came across other survivors, refugees now leaving their destroyed homes, heading to the city to seek shelter. I tried to nurse Lenali as best I could, giving her water during brief periods of waking and dressing her wounds, but true healing could not happen till I reached the city. Elvia was a quiet chaos, oppressed by fear and uncertainty, an air of dread filling all the streets. The news had broken that our army had been entirely wiped out. There would be no loved ones returning to their families, and a sound of stifled mourning was to be heard in all corners of the city. I took Lenali straight to the healing grounds in the palace and gave her to the doctors the strictest instructions. They were swamped by casualties, but followed my orders without question, tending immediately to her wounds and applying tinctures and regenerative spells. It was as I watched over her quietly that party bustled loudly in the grounds. I recognized at the head was Parisa, a senior court official. At her side was an elderly human who immediately went to where Lenali lay. General Arayan, announced Parisa loudly. I heard you were here, but I could scarce believe it. Thank the Freds, you have returned to us. This is a grave time. We must talk at once. I ignored her, as I saw a human touch Lena's hand and her eyes gently open. Quillen, she murmured softly. Aye, it is me, my lady, he said quietly. I have been sent here by your father. He has ordered me to pass you this. And with that he brought forth a golden ring set with a fiery ruby. I recognized it immediately as the ring of Karkrul, worn by the mighty Turfel. And then I sat up quickly, wincing from the pain, but with her eyes locked on the ring as it placed in her hand. But my father! I'm sorry, my lady. It brings me great sorrow to bear you these news. Your father and his court are dead. His last act was to instruct me to bring this ring in to you and your sister, Nera, he said, glancing about. Is she? He saw the look in Lai's eye and dipped his head despondently. I see. I am terribly sorry. It becomes my duty then, my lady, to declare to you the new leader of Karkrul. General Arayan, interjected Parisa. I really must speak with you. Wait! I barked and turned to Hugh and Cullen. What is happening here? How could one such as Turfel be killed? The man looked at me, then with a wane of sadness in his eyes before turning to address Anali. Yesterday, the day after the terrible Spellblaze, as we began some attempt at reconstruction, still struggling to realign our mana paths, a murmur began amongst our people. It spoke thus. The Karkrul circle of mages have betrayed the ordinary people. They accused us of siding with the elves to destroy non-mages, of toying with terrible powers beyond our control, of deliberately masquerading them out of evil and malice. We could not logic with them, they would listen to no reason, and they rose up in violent anger. They attacked many of us, with firing instruments and whatever weapons they could find. Our defenses were weak, and striking back just made the crowd fiercer. We retreated to your father's home, begging for help, but he shook his head and said he could not fight back. They came for us then, storming his palace, and Turfel ordered us all to put up no resistance. He handed me his ring, saying to seek you out in Elvia, and then stepped outside to face the crowds. He didn't resist. The people, He lapsed into sullen sounds, shaking his head in sorrow. He looked like he wanted to cry, but he had no tears left to shed. Anali's face was graven, and she stared hard at the ring. Brissa grabbed me down and turned me to her attention. This is what I need to speak with you about, General Arayan. If this human's tale is to be believed, then we are in very grave danger. Scouts reports suggest there is a body of humans coming here from the north as we speak. From what this human says, they seek retribution. They wish to slaughter all of us. A storm of wrath lies on our border, and we are defenseless. We need you desperately to organize our defenses, to protect our people, and our city and our people. I felt numb and events overwhelmed me. But who leads us, I said. There is no one. What royals are known to be alive are not suited. We are entering a time of war, a terrible time like no other we have faced. We need military leadership. You, General Arayan, you must be our leader. I held Parisa's gaze then and saw the wisdom in her words. My duty as a Shalom was clear, but my heart tremored as I turned to look at Lunali. This be our path, then, Arayan, she said quietly, raising herself from her bed and carefully placed the ring in the middle finger of her right hand. I must tend to my people, and you to yours. We will not meet again. But your wounds, I tried to object. Will never heal, she cried, hate dripping from her voice. Her eyes were like cold and purple ice, a swelling anger deep within. Come, Quillen, we must leave this place. And with that they departed, Lunali walking tall and proud in spite of her injuries. I closed off my heart and my emotions then, lest they overwhelm me. My duty was before me, and the events of the past had to be locked away from memory. The ceremony was organized in under an hour, and I was anointed leader of the Grand Council of Elvia, leader of the Shalorn people. On my orders, rangers began transporting the survivors from the outpost settlements, whilst I commanded our remaining mages to begin a new endeavor around our city walls. The first waves of storms of hate came the next day. Human peasants and farmers, ordinary workers armed poorly, their looted swords and spears badly wielded. I stood alone at our gates as they approached, mooncutter in my hand. When the first few charged me, I thrust my blade into the soil and tore a great chasm in the earth, and our mages summoned a forth mist and smoke that rose from the ground and began to surround our whole city. As the peasants stumbled in confusion, archers started firing from our walls. What few made it through the smoke, the arrows I took on, tearing the mooncutter through their flesh with little resistance. Their blood gushed out in the gallons, drenching our ground, staining my skin. It was like a warm shower over my boiling emotions, a bath in blood to wash over my sins. The shroud of Elvia was begun, as our whole city was wreathed in cloud and smoke. Our shield, our mask, our hiding. It would last for centuries, the only dealings with the outside world being in first secrecy. So yeah, basically, after the Spellblaze Elvia hit itself, and then only recently did they, like, you know, come out as, like, you know, a visual public city. So, from the memories of Maj'Eyal, leader of the Grand Council of Elvia, Chapter 7, Into Darkness. We veiled our guilt, cloaked our crimes. Though we had some communication with the outside world, halfling traders and the odd, disguised Shelloran adventurer, we remained mute to the world, at large, hidden from their accusing gaze. Outside our quiet walls, others had not the luxury of hiding. The spellpun was begun, and it knew no mercy. Ordinary people rose up against what they perceived as the arrogance of mages, or revolted against the power of the few that had ruined the lives of so many. Any suspected of sorcery or ties to the art were cruelly dealt with. There was sympathy for none, and many innocents fell victim to the unquenchable thirst for retribution. The madness swept across the whole of Maj'Eyal. Law and order had broken down, armies and territories and whole cities had been destroyed or ravaged by the Spellblaze. With many areas left completely uninhabitable, kingdoms fell and tyrants arose. Bands picked at the bones of civilization like vultures on a rotten corpse. An organization called Ziggurat, fought dead long ago, came into resurgence, gaining popular support from the people in their anti-magic crusade. We heard of some mages going into hiding, but inevitably being rooted out, or fleeing desperately from place to place. Dark tales also arose of necromancers and fell witches creating dungeons and strongholds, fending off or evading attacks and beginning reigns of terror. And one tale came to my ears of a group of mages that managed to band together and stay in hiding, though always on the run from the chasing Ziggurat. The story from outside was that they were led by a demon with fiery hair, fiercely glowing eyes, and hands wrapped in flames, that fought with blazing wrath and could be opposed by none. I knew that description well. I carried out my reign, my duty taking care of the Sherland people. We were safe from attackers, securing our supplies for discreet trade and slowly building back what had been lost. But both fear and shame prevent us from showing our face to the world. 15 long years passed before I woke one night, and in my council chambers the crescent wintertide moon softly illuminated a shape near the end of my bed. The figure was tall and slim, wrapped in tightly fitted wools and furs. Her crimson hair stirred gently as she stood with her back to me. Memories arose of a night long ago, in a more instant time, when a younger me and a younger her first became close. I barely dared to whisper her name, afraid that she might disappear, an apparition or a dream that could be broken by the spoken word. Linali, I softly mouthed. She turned to me, and I saw those dark eyes, I remembered, but they were shrouded by lines of care. The markings of years, strain, and responsibilities clear on her face. Rising from my bed, I gathered a robe about me. I took a few steps towards her, but stopped, not able to move myself any further. I wanted to be near her, to put my arms around her, but I felt as if she were crossing a wide chasm from me, a gulf of time and pain between us. I have come for help, Arian, she said in a low voice, not quite meeting my gaze. There be something I seek, and ye must aid me in achieving it. I did not understand, but I nodded my assent. Get ye dressed and ready then. There will be a long journey ahead of us. She stepped toward the window, her back toward me again, waiting as I put on a starlight mail and gathered my sword. When she noticed I was ready, she levitated out and I followed. We whistled through the air, traveling northwards at great speed. The land swept beneath us, and the climate grew colder as we went further and further north. Hours passed in intrepid silence, till we were flying above the snowy tundra. We soared past plains of white and gray before we reached the low range of hills. Here Linali slowed and ascended, and I went down beside her. We came to the rest from a dark opening at the foot of the hills. Linali stood for a while, staring at the black cave. Fear radiated from her face, but her eyes were hard and determined. It is here, she said quietly, her voice steady. I followed her gaze, trying to guess what secrets this remote place contained, but I could sense nothing special. She marched forward, and I followed until we came right up to the shadowy opening. Linali hesitated a moment, staring into the blackness, before finally stepping inside and being swallowed from sight. I could feel it then, the sensation that something ancient lay in its place. My skin tingled, and my arcane attunement felt on fire. This dark cave held some mysterious force, secluded from all knowledge since the oldest days of Maj'Eyal. There was something here that could change the destiny of the world. I took a deep breath and stepped forwards. From the Memoirs of Maj'Eyal, leader of the Grand Council of Elvia. Chapter 8, Forbidden. Light sprung from Linali's staff, and she cast about a luminescence, revealing a narrow icy passageway that led downwards. It was deathly cold, and our breaths condensed in clouds as we made our way down the winding tunnels. My skin prickled, and all my senses seemed on edge. "What is down here?" I asked, my curiosity all-consuming. "Power," Lunali replied, not looking at me as she spoke, continuing to follow the path. "And power be what I seek. I am feared for mine people, but have not the strength to protect them as I would like. With what be here, perhaps I shall have the power to make a safe haven. This be a place of legend amongst mine people, and I have scouted it out for many years. Today I shall finally reach what lies at the center." "And why do you need me?" She didn't respond, but carried onwards. We reached a split in the tunnel, and without hesitation, Lunali took the left path. It led further and further underground. We came to blockages, but by arcane forces their sorcerers easily cleared the way. As we passed through a large cavern, I sensed movement, and I drew Mooncutter quickly. What looked like a dismounted limb or some great thrashing worm was writhing toward us pathetically. Lunali sent a blast of fire towards it, and it squealed and it went still. And then more movement, 100 movements. From crevices and holes in the wall and ceilings where there burst out dozens upon dozens of worm-like creatures, their maggoty bodies flapping rigorously, fanged mouths opening up and screaming torturous sounds. Lunali growled and began sending torrents of flame towards the approaching horde. I covered her back, slicing open their pale green flesh and sending strokes of lightning through their ranks. In under a minute we had dispatched them all. I pried a corpse with my foot and it collapsed in a sludge. "What strange creatures," I commented. I looked at Lunali for some explanation, but she simply proceeded forward. I followed after, keeping my sword in hand and watching closely for further attacks. At the other end of the cavern, a wall of ice blocked our way. Lunali held up the ring of Karkrul, and the jewel on it began to blaze. The ice melted away, slowly revealing a passage to another smaller chamber. This cold, crypt-like hollow was covered in smooth, glistening ice on all sides. The walls were square and straight, and the ancient pillars of marble were dotted about the room. On the pillars and walls were weathered runes and symbols. I came close to study some, but couldn't recognize them from any of my studies. "What was this place?" I asked, turning to Lunali. "It seems older even than Shell's jewel." She ran her hand over the walls, tracing the outline of the door. "It be a temple to Kreke god of a race called the Waisi. They were killed off by the Shirtu long before our races were born. They did build the temple in honor of Kinqueri, and the last of them did die here defending her." I looked about in awe. Though I had explored many Shirtu ruins, I hadn't seen anything like this. The architecture was simple, but elegant. There was crude beauty in all. I turned back to the door Lunali was examining. So, before I continue, it's worth knowing that this is something really to note about this. You don't really get a whole lot of information about the gods or what they sort of did, but here's our first little bit of talk basically about Kukarja, who was basically the god who created the Waisi. And of course the Waisi are the race that you basically meet with the orcs in the Embers of Rage campaign. So it's worth knowing what these god references are all about, because this will be a lot more important future DLCs to come out or future campaigns. Hint hint, nudge nudge. Anyhow, let's just continue on. She was trying to open it, but was obviously struggling to find a way. "There'd be some key, some puzzle to open this," she muttered, "but I can nae solve it. The secret be lost to time." She growled in anger and stood back. Holding out her staff, she unleashed a blast of arcane force from it, violently splitting the stone door apart and tearing open a passage to a chamber beyond. Many things suddenly happened at once. From beyond I felt this pulse of energy. A huge surge of power that I had never felt before. Lunali was focused on it intensely, but noise came from all around the creatures moving a sudden. From the cave we had entered, from there was a shriek of 100 wailing voices, and the floor beneath our feet trembled. Rocks fell from the ceiling, and outburst horrific creatures with spiked limbs and smooth triangular faces. From the trembling ground arose the strange ethereal beings of light, with long tentacles for limbs, and as I turned to face these threats I saw that in the previous cavern the worms had come back to life and were now coalescing in a huge mass of putrid flesh. I tried to cut through the being of light, but my sword barely slowed it as it passed through it, and the flames I saw seemed to have little effect. It raised a tentacle toward me, and an intensely bright beam of light shone from it through my torso, filling my flesh with searing pain. I jumped back and sent a wave of ice at it, tearing off a tentacle and pushing it further away. Meanwhile, Lunali had reduced one of the spiked creatures to a pile of ash, but her arcane shield was collapsing beneath the slash of the other, and more were spilling from the ceiling. In the entranceway, the massive worms was pressing through, and from the mouths of the flowing bodies came spits of burning acid. We were at severe risk of being surrounded in this confined space. The numbers too many to take at once. "Over here!" shouted Lanali as he dashed through the door she had split apart. I followed, slashing my blade through the massive worms, causing it to lurch back, screeching in pain, and spearing a blast of lightning through one of the spiked creatures, splitting open its head. It continued to attack me, but I parried and cut its arm off, dancing around it and reaching the doorway. With my back to the opening, I brought up a wall of water and sent it flooding into the chamber, pushing the horrors away as I leapt backward through the door. As soon as I passed through, Lanali thrust her staff into the ground, and a pillar of rock rose upwards, sealing off the opening. I could hear thrashing and thumping sounds from the other side, but for now we seemed safe. "What were those things?" I asked incredulously, as I scanned around the open cavern for signs of any more creatures. It was a large space, but everything was still, and I could see no other entrances. "Scions and the Macfell," she responded calmly. "The Butcher God seeks to break his chains, but he needs more power. And here in this dark, forgotten place is part of what power he seeks. And what is here? What terrible power lies that would draw both you and those horrors?" "Pecorja," she said. "Pecorja? The god?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was it not slain by Shartul? Aye, that it were. But there be power even in slain god. Look behind ye, Arian. I turned, then wondering what she wanted me to behold. It took me a moment to see it, but when I did, I gasped in shock. The far wall in this great cavern was not merely a wall. It was covered in a thick layer of ice, but beneath at its center I could make out a huge yellow eye. And around the eye I could see a trace of a giant form. Dark grey skin covered a bulging head, topped with 3 great curved horns, which sat atop a long, thick body with 6 limbs. It was deathly still and chillingly ancient, seemingly more like a part of the rock than anything that had once been alive. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but I could feel it. In that corpse was still power, immense power, like nothing I had ever felt before. "This be it," said Lanali, "one of the few corpses of a god left to find Maj'Eyal, and I shall take this power as mine own." "This is insane," I shouted. "You have no idea if that is safe or not. You don't know what it will do to you." She chuckled darkly. "Aye, that be true. But that is why I have brought ye here." I looked at her in confusion, and she chuckled again. You still not know your purpose here. Did ye think I took ye here for protection? That I couldn't not handle those horrors of mine own? No, there be a different reason I have brought ye. When I absorb the corpse, when I take this power for my own, I do not know what will become of me. It may kill me, or it may drive me mad. It may turn me into something terrible. Should that happen, Arian, you art the only one I know with the strength to kill me. The words hit me like a blow to the chest. Kill you? But I couldn't. But ye must, she said firmly. After all, ye have done all the torture ye have brought my life. Ye owe me this. I looked deep into her eyes and saw the turmoil of emotions within, the pain and agony of all that had befallen her, the hatred and blame of those who had wronged her, the guilt and shame for not being able to do more herself, and deep inside still some touch of love for me and what we had shared. I reached out my hand and stroked her soft hair, my fingers touching slowly against the side of her face. I leaned in close and she closed her eyes, turning her face up to me as I moved my lips toward hers. No, she suddenly cried, pushing me back. It cannot be. She swiftly turned from me, and I saw a tear drip down her one cheek. The world has changed, Ariane. I have a duty before me, and none can walk that path besides me. And with that she began to run, staff in hands, toward the great eye, whose dead gaze was locked behind a wall of ice. I sprinted after her, but she was faster, and with running leap she thrust the base of her staff through the ice and in the center of the god's eye. The ice cracked with a deafening thunder, and a giant yellow eye pulsed before exploding to a ball of light. I stopped and covered my eyes as white light flooded the room and shards of ice flew through the air. I could barely make out Lanali, bathed in light, hanging with one hand from her staff, her hair and a rose blown backwards as she reached forwards with her other arm. Slowly and trepidly, she placed her hand into the center of a ball of light where the eye had been, and the shadows danced around the cavern as she wrapped her fingers around the luminous sphere before squeezing tight. The cavern shook, her staff shattered, the wall creaked and it split before wholly blasting apart. The corpse of the dead god collapsed into a stream of silver, and a roaring cacophony rushed toward Lanali, tearing apart her robes and sinking into her skin. She floated in the air, limbs outstretched as a vast energy poured into her flesh. She opened her mouth as if to scream, and light burst out, and light filled from her eyes and ears. The cavern quaked dangerously, and rocks fell from the walls and ceiling, but in seconds it was over. The corpse of the god fully absorbed, and light in Lana's eyes went out, and she dropped to the ground like a stone. Then the horrors broke through, the collapsing cavern having made an opening for them, and immediately they sped hungrily to where Lana lay. "No!" I cried, rushing to intercept them. "You cannot have her." I sliced off the head of a spiked creature, and put up a wall of fire ahead of the rest of them, as I backed toward Lana's body. She looked dead, with no sign of movement or breathing, but I had no time to check. The being of light and tentacles passed through my flame without resistance, and I ran sparks along my sword as I tore it up the center of the monster. It shot life through my torso, and I coughed up blood, but I forced my sword in deeper and ran a flood of arcane energy through it, blowing the thing apart. More spiked creatures came, and I took care of my footing whilst parrying and chopping on my left and sending waves of flame to my right. The massive worms broke through the wall, and with it 2 more luminous horrors and some fiend of darkness and nightmares, and I could see behind others were spilling through. I put up a shield as rays of light shot towards me and sent balls of frost back at them. One of the light beams fell, whilst the other was slowed. The dark thing came quickly, and the massive worms were not far behind, so I sliced my sword across the ground, sending heat through it, and turned the stone into a mass of lava. The dark thing came around it, and I felt an aura of deathly cold from it as I approached. I hacked at it desperately, and it shot back speared limbs toward my chest that seemed to suck all the strength from me. With a roar, I shot a pulse of flames down my blade, and it burst apart. The worms charged directly over the lava, squealing in pain as the bulk of them were burned, but coming at me with speed. I adjusted my grip, getting ready to make a deft stroke to stay out of its range, but a lance of light that shot through my leg dropped me to one knee with a scream. The massive worms rushed at me then, and I dug my sword deep into their midst, but the worms crawled over my arms, digging their acidic teeth into my flesh and reaching for my neck. With my left arm, I cast a blanket of flames over them, bringing my arm along with the screeching worms. They pulled away slightly, but the beam of light was approaching from the side, a tentacle flaring up in luminescent energy, and 3 spiked horrors were behind it. My right arm was burnt, my left leg injured, my mail pocked with holes, and my mana reserves were running low. But I gritted my teeth in determination. I could not back from this fight. I rushed at the massive worms with my sword held firm. It exploded in a fiery mess, and an intense wave of force and fire blasted across the cavern, turning the other horse to ash, and even burning through the luminous beings. A low scream arising from it as the flames tore it apart. I gasped, not knowing whence their displays had come, until I turned around and saw Lunali. She was standing tall, her rose burnt off, flames dancing up and down her skin, bright lights shining from her eyes. Heat seemed to radiate from her. I kept my grip on my sword, not sure if this was the Lunali I knew, or some other force born in her union with the dead god. She laughed suddenly, and it was a harsh laugh that I had not heard her make before. "What a fool I have been," she said almost to herself. "I brought you here in case you had to stop me, but now my power exceeds you by a long distance. You would have no hopes of opposing me." She made a low sound, somewhat between a laugh and a sigh. "Ah, but you have no cause to worry. I am still me, mostly. And through pain and sacrifice I have achieved the power I desired, the power I need." I let my sword dip, and breathed heavily. Relief mingled with trepidation sweeping through me, whilst withdrawing adrenaline of battle left me feeling exhausted. I looked Lanai over, her pale skin now glowing with her eyes brimming in energy vitality. I saw the power she had was not in mere force, but that she had taken on the ancient nature of the gods. A power forbidden to all creatures was now hers and hers alone. "What now?" I said quietly. "Now, you go home. I go make mine home, a sanctuary for me and mine people." "Will we meet again?" She smiled sadly. "Mayhaps, mayhaps not. The world changes quicker than predictions can tell, but if we do meet again, it shall be in a place that does not yet exist, the city of Angolin." She raised an arm, then, and from it shot a tremendous pulse of arcane energy. The violet lights shooting to the roof of the cavern and spearing deep through, they'll split the rock apart right through the opening sky a mile above. Sunlight spilled down, splashing over Lenai's lithe form. It had been hours since this long night had begun. "But for now, farewell, Ariane," she said as she began to float from the ground, and then she sped up and soared out of sight. I lay down on a cold stone, resting for a while, slowly healing my wounds and recovering my strength. I reflected on the events since the evening before, thinking back on the trials of all the races of Maj'Eyal. War, disease, death, and all equality. Was Lanali beyond all that? How would a taste of immortality affect her? It was then that I fought for a race came to me. In ages past, we had searched for immortality. Our ancestral leaders have obsessed over it, but out of vanity, pride, and fear of death. What would be the real effects if all our society were gifted with it? With an immortal life, we might separate ourselves from the strife of war and the worlds. It would give us a perspective beyond the petty squabbles and prideful competition of the other races. I dug through the ice and rocks and found still some traces of the dead god Krikori, faint though they were. I gathered up all that was left and made the long journey back to Elvia. There I retreated to my labs, studying the remains for years before finally unlocking its secrets. It was thus the immortality for our race was born, and it has changed our outlook on the world ever since. We stood apart from the others then, not engaging in war, finding a new respect for life. It was not till Garkul the Devourer assaulted our gates in the ancient Pyre that we ever had a cause for large-scale war again, and I rode out to face him in combat. But that isn't our tale. One indeed of many tales, in a long and rich history of Tales of Maj'Eyal. Now, before close this, it's worth knowing that when they're basically talking about these horrors, when they're in that cave, you can tell this is a description of the different types of horrors that you can fight. So it's worth knowing these horrors basically they arise from a Macfell. So the luminescent horrors, the worms that walks, the umbral horror, those were all told as actual horrors that you get to fight. And it says something about a spiked horror, so I'm assuming that perhaps there's blade horrors perhaps somewhere in there, but who knows. There's some sort of spiked horror. I'm not sure if you fight spiked horrors, but maybe there is one. And then it's worth knowing that there's these guys basically, the Shaloran, they stayed out of war until the Age of Pyre came. Well, whatever. That was a lot of gold to spend, but I think it's worth spending. Alright, there is a little bit more lore in the world to basically read. A little bit more. Over here in Last Hope. There'll be a library over here. Not there. Alright, so this will be a little bit more stuff to basically read, but it should be a lot quicker than the Spellblaze Chronicles. Let's see here. Let's talk about the analysis of humans. Lord Master Greynaut's Analysis of the Races, Chapter 1, Humans. I begin my writings with a study of the humans, currently the most populous of the races in Maj'Eyal. The greatest kingdom in number are by far the Kornax, but mention should also be made of the Shroshur and the Mardruk kingdoms, and the higher bloodline. The biggest human population center is around the Citadel of Last Hope, though many are summons exist across all corners of Maj'Eyal. Kornax are normally around 5 feet 9 inches, with generally dark hair, brown eyes, and ruddy features. Most Kornax take up roles as tradesmen, farmers, or other manual labor jobs. It is a sad fact that the majority of bandit groups tend to be dominated by Kornax. Kornak families tend to be large, and since the Age of Dust, their population expanded rapidly, especially in the farming lands in the west and around Last Hope in the south. Sheltar are generally 5 feet 11, with dark skin, hair, and eyes. They originate from the southeast of Maj'Eyal, and are few in number since the Cataclysm tore much of their land into the sea. Their affinity with nature is renowned, and they are often found employed as healers, infusion crafters, or runic huntsmen. Mardruk humans are all but extinct after the spell hunt and the plagues during the Age of Dusk. They were known to be powerful spellcasters, and as such were prime targets by spell hunters. However, some traces of them can still be found, as their fiery hair and freckled skin often can appear in those distant descent. A few are rumored to still possess citadels and towers in remote locations. So it's worth knowing that the Mardruk are they're basically what Lanali I guess was. So she was like a Mardruk, and then after the spell hunt they mostly head to Anglin to basically hide away. Anyhow, hires are on average 6 feet, with fair hair and skin and blue or gray eyes. The majority of scholarly race roles are taken up by hires, and they tend to fill most of the noble classes. Some say this is due to discrimination and elitism, though this may simply be jealous sentiments. There are also rumors that the superior intellects of hires are due to arcane experimentations instigated by the ancient conflict during the Age of Allure. But I have found no records to support this idea, and must consider it baseless. The higher bloodline is renowned as a mark of excellence, and mixing with lower bloods is strongly frowned upon. All human kingdoms were united by King Tukner, the Brave in the Age of Pyre, and remained under the rule of his son, King Tulk the Fair. A full discussion of the long human history would require a far more detailed document. So that's a little bit about the humans. You know, it's funny. There's no races like the Shultur and Mardrop, but they do exist. For the most part, I bet they're pretty much just like, regular Gorneks, which is why, they don't have their own special place. Alright, well, let's talk about the Halflings. Lore Master Greynott's Announcement of Races, Chapter 2, Halflings. There are two main kingdoms of Halflings, the Eldoror and the Nargol, though both mix often. All Halflings are just under 4 feet tall, and are generally noted for their large feet and curly hair. Eldora are usually fair-haired and blue-eyed. Nargol tend to be darker in hair and complexion, with hazel eyes and off slightly shorter than their cousins. Halflings are known for their intelligence and quick wit, but also their arrogance in dealing with other races, something they do not deny, for they say is well deserved. Halflings used to be the most dominant race in Maj'Eyal, with control of many strategic shelter ruins, and rule over great swaths of land. The recorded wars between humans and Halflings are numerous, and the Halflings were the most often victors. However, the Age of Pyre brought them great ruin, for the Orcs seemed to target them more fiercely than any other race, and many of the communities were wiped out. This has forced them to rely more on trade with other races in modern times, especially with the humans. The Eldorors used to have a kingdom in the north of the continent, but most of it was destroyed during the wars with the wars of the Orcs, and not much has been rebuilt. However, they do still have many agricultural centers such as Durf, albeit share with other races. The Eldor are known for their great healers and farmers, and their slingers are considered the best in all the lands. The Nargols once had many strong fortifications in the south of Maj'Eyal, but though they suffered less than the Ardor in the Age of Pyre, they still lost great numbers, and much of their centers of population dwindled. The rise of Last Hope has accelerated this process, as many communities are subsumed into the city suburbs. Nargols are known as great jewelers, alchemists, and runecrafters, and possess some of the best tactical minds in all the races. Many generals and military advisors are often employed from their kingdom. The most famous of all Halflings is Queen Mervenia, most famed for her saving of King Tukner in Last Hope from an age of orcs. Mystery still surrounds how she managed to bypass the wintry's icy flows with her army to reach the citadel in time to reach Tukner. Some have hypothesized that she enlisted the aid of the sorcerers, but none of her troops would talk about the journey afterwards. She wed King Tukner in the second year of the Age of Ascendancy, and gave birth to the first known mixed-race child, Tulk the Fair. So yes, basically there's a little bit about, the Halflings. And then we got Lore Master Greynott's Announcement of Races introduction here. I set out here to give a full and complete analysis of all the intelligent races in Maj'Eyal. This is an ambitious project to say the least, but it is put together from a great many years of labor, including travels across all the kingdoms, and direct meetings with many of the highest rulers and most learned sages. I have drawn my findings from common knowledge, exclusive interviews, and studies of many thousands of pages of text and histories, some going back dozens of centuries. I myself am a higher human, an employee of the court of King Tulk the Fair, but I have done my best to write all accounts from a purely neutral standpoint. I leave it to my peers to judge my success. The Index. Chapter 1 is Humans, Chapter 2 is Halflings, 3 is Dwarves, 4 is Shaloran, 5 is Faloran, 6 is Noloran, 7 is Ogres, 8 is Orcs, 9 is Shartul, 10 is Monstrous Races, and 11 is Dragons. Now, here's a question. Will Lore Master Greynott perhaps have more races in the future? Because technically, there is actually, a lot of races that he could write about now. For example, he possibly could talk about, the Kruk Yeti, he could talk about, the White Hooves. Lots of stuff for him to talk about. And there will be new races for sure in, the future as well, with, new campaigns, as you can probably guess. Alright, how long have I been going? Alright, wow, I've actually gone for quite a while. You know what? Let's actually cut this episode here. Next episode, I'll probably finish off the lore and get back to actually playing the game. Perhaps we'll be able to get through Dreadfall completely, and that'll be good for an episode. But this will be it for now, for this episode. So take care, all.